coming up.
So, Minister, your testimony is that you cannot tell Canadians when you learned of a serious privacy breach that was reported in the news.
So we now know that in July, 31,000 accounts have been breached, correct?
These frauds often result in a debt owing to the government, a debt owing to the taxpayer. So with respect to the GST, very sophisticated GST carousel schemes, my question would be, what's the highest amount that the government has written off with respect to the GST carousel schemes?
Are you currently investigating whistleblowers within the CRA?
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
The committee is commencing its study of privacy breaches at the Canada Revenue Agency. I would like to welcome our witnesses for the first hour today. Appearing today, we have the Honorable Marie-Claude Bibeau, Minister of National Revenue, and by her side, we have from the Canada Revenue Agency, Bob Hamilton.
Very much, Mr. Chair. Bienvenue, Ministre. Thank you for coming. I believe it's our first time at committee together. When were you first made aware of the privacy breach that was reported in the CBC just a couple weeks ago?
Okay. Well, as you know, I can't speak of any specific occurrence. Mais ce que je peux vous dire, c'est que bon.
But what I can say is that as soon as I got to the agency in July last year, I had a comprehensive briefing on all potential fraud cases and the cases that were under investigation at the time. And every time after that point onwards, every time there was a somewhat important investigation, I was informed of the situation.
You were informed of fraud when you arrived at the CRA, when you received your first briefing, is that correct?
I had a general briefing on the different possibilities and on the past history.
But as it relates to the specific privacy breach that was reported with connection with H&R Block, when were you made aware of that case or those cases?
Vous savez...
Well, I'm sure that you know full well, Mr. Chambers, because of the Section 241 on the Income Tax Act. I cannot talk about specific cases.
Minister, I'm very familiar with Section 241. We are not talking about an in particular taxpayer at the moment. We're asking for when were you made aware? There is a briefing note, a memo, that has the sentence in it. Consensus is that gaps pose major risk to the agencies. Where there are internal funding, human resource considerations, all agree that visibility is needed. Do you recall receiving that memo?
Je reçois plusieurs mémos. Je suis briefée de différents.
I receive many memos, and I'm verbally briefed and in writing in different ways, so that doesn't surprise me.
To shed some light, this memo. Do you recall the memo that I'm referring to? This was reported in the CBC.
No, I do not.
No, you do not. Okay.
No, I do not. And I would just echo what the minister said. That
I have very limited time, Commissioner. I appreciate it. So, Minister, your testimony is that you cannot tell Canadians when you learned of a serious privacy breach that was reported in the news.
Je suis informée.
I am rapidly informed when the agency identifies a potential fraud case.
Be fair to say, if you're rapidly informed when the breach occurred, you likely would have been informed shortly thereafter, correct?
Absolument. Okay. Quand il y a une breach.
Absolutely. When there's a breach, a significant breach, I am quickly informed.
So why was that breach not reported to the public as a material breach when you learned of it shortly after it occurred?
Alors, la façon dont on fonctionne à l'agence.
Well, the way they work at the agency is that as soon as there's doubt, there's identity theft. First off, they block the account, and we communicate with the individual or the individuals or the company that is concerned. So we inform that person directly. So it's only in cases where there is something that's more generalized. For instance, during COVID, we would go ahead with an at-large communication, but it's usually the person and the person's concerns. They were immediately informed.
Thousands of taxpayers affected. If this breach occurred outside of government, there are obligations for those organizations to publicly inform the public. Why is it that this breach was not publicized, but worse, withheld from the Privacy Commissioner until after the deadline passed for him to include it in his report in 2024?
Je peux vous dire que déjà dans le...
Well, I can tell you that in the general report of the auditor for 2022, we had already started revealing or transferring this information, providing this information, because yes, today you're talking to me about a block of 31,000 identity theft cases, but this has happened across multiple years, many years. And if you go back to the Auditor General's report from 2022, you would see that there are already 23,000 cases that have been made public.
If the process at CRA works really well and that the minister is informed relatively shortly after you're made aware of privacy breaches that happened over multiple years, it's reasonable to assume that you or your predecessor were made aware of these privacy breaches well before the March deadline that the Privacy Commissioner needs in order to include these privacy breaches in their annual report to Parliament. Why was it that these privacy breaches were reported to the Privacy Commissioner after the deadline when your own testimony suggests that you would have been made aware of these privacy breaches well before the deadline to report these to the public?
Donc moi je suis informée rapidement.
Well, I'm quickly informed when there are attempts at identity theft, and then we need to validate. And to do that, we inform the individual or the individuals quickly, and then we report the situation. And as I said, we had already started reporting the situation in the AG report from 2022.
There have been very few breaches at the CRA because he was not made aware of them to include in his report in 2024. So the timeline just doesn't quite work for me at this moment, but I believe I've expired my time.
Okay, merci, Monsieur Villemure. Mr. Green, you have 6 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Minister, I have to state right off the top, I found your responses to Mr. Chambers highly evasive. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to reply on the Nixon test. I'm going to start with just an agreed statement of facts that you've raised. You stated that the AG reported in 2022 that 23,000 accounts had been breached. Is that correct?
Yes.
You took office in 2023. Is that correct? You became a minister of this in 2023?
Yes.
And in that transition, you would have been updated on the breaches in 2022, correct?
Yes.
And you would have been aware that some $190 million in scams and due to hacking came from losses that went as far back in 2020. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Reasonable.
So we now know that in July, 31,000 accounts have been breached, correct?
Yeah, it's reasonable to, yeah.
Okay, so in that space, at what time did you know that the 31,000 accounts had been breached? Was that back in July of 2024?
I can't be that specific.
Why?
I can tell you, because I don't recall every briefing I've got.
This is a significant breach. Like,
I know, but you're asking me specific numbers.
Minister, we're talking about a material breach of thousands of people, hundreds of millions of dollars in your department. Mr. Hamilton, I'll put to you the Nixon test. At what point in time did you know these breaches happened?
I'm kept regularly aware of the breaches that happen. I think just for clarification.
The date, sir. I'd like to know the date that you knew.
I don't know the dates off the top of my head.
You don't know the date?
No.
Did you know you were coming to this committee to talk about this issue?
Yes.
What briefings did you do in preparation for this committee?
I made sure that I was aware of all of the actions that we have taken, the history of the file.
Including the dates?
I think it's important, not the specific dates of when I became aware.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I just want to make reference that the commissioner has on his desk right now, I'll describe for the Hansard, a briefing document. And I would put to you Minister, you would also be well aware of the last 5 weeks of filibusters that we've had based on committee's ability to demand for documents. Is that correct? And the reason why I'm bringing that up, sir, is because what I don't want to have to do is ask this committee to move a motion to request that you submit all the documents that are sitting on that table. What I'd rather you do is just answer with clarity, because I am unwilling to accept that you came to this committee without any understanding of the dates in which you would have been informed that these breaches happened.
Can I take a stab at answering your question?
Sure.
Because I think it's important, first off, to differentiate between two periods. There was the pandemic and there's post-pandemic. And there was a lot of breaches that occurred during the pandemic, and I think you referenced 23,000 or whatever.
My clock is running, unfortunately.
As we went, more cases became known.
At what point does it become material enough that you feel like you have a duty of candor to the public to let them know that this kind of scale of privacy breach has happened within your department, sir?
Well, there was actually a press conference at the time of the pandemic that indicated.
I'm talking about under this minister's administration.
And then we report these in a transparent way to the Privacy Commissioner. I am acknowledging there was a delay in the reporting.
Mr. Hamilton, there seems to be a culture of secrecy here. Can you please tell me about your department's policy on whistleblowers?
Sure, and I can tell you we're among the most transparent in giving information out. I acknowledge the delay. Our policy on whistleblowers is we encourage people to talk to their managers, their supervisors, if they see something. Second, we have an internal process that is anonymous, where people can bring concerns they have if they think they see something is going wrong in an anonymity. And then above that, across the whole government, we have a public integrity commissioner who people can complain to.
So that leads me to the email that you sent out. I'm sure you'll recall the email that you sent out about upholding our integrity. When we speak about whistleblowers in the context of public disclosure, we often mean taking a risk at your place of employment to disclose to the public potential malfeasance or malpractice that would be happening within your workplace for the benefit of the public good. You haven't described that. What's your opinion on whistleblowing as it relates to employees inside your agency who might present to the public problems that are happening within your agency?
Two things I would say. We have good internal processes for people to whistleblow and action to be taken. The second thing is employees have a responsibility to not talk about taxpayer information.
It's not information specifically. It's not disaggregated information. It's about a major and massive breach of privacy to the average Canadian who, by the way, when that happens, the kind of pain I help process thousands of tax returns for people. And I know that if there's fraudulent work that's happening there, many of these people, seniors, people on fixed incomes, all of a sudden they're not getting their OAS, their GIS, they're not getting all their entitlements, not to mention their tax returns. So I'm going to put one last question to you, sir, in this round, and I'm going to ask you to answer it honestly so that I don't have to move a motion to demand that you provide it to this committee. What is the total amount lost to the public purse, including bogus payouts on GST and business returns, whether or not from the hacked accounts?
What was the last part? Sorry.
Whether or not it's from the hacked accounts. Generally speaking, what is the cost of the total amounts lost due to bogus payouts on GST and business returns?
I don't have that number. We actually have officials who will come for the second hour that might be able to help. Otherwise, we'll have to get back to you. The other thing I would say on your whistleblower, yes, you can't give out taxpayer-specific information, and we also don't talk publicly about the schemes that people are trying to do with us or our actions, because we don't want to perpetuate the playbook, if you like, out in the public domain. So we have a strong culture of trying to encourage, if people see something going wrong, through the mechanisms.
Sorry, I've got to stop you there. My understanding...
One point of order.
There's a problem with the English translation. I was just made aware of that, Mr. Green.
Minister, you testified earlier that you have zero tolerance for fraud in all its forms at the CRA. How much fraud, what's been the loss to taxpayers from all forms of fraud at the CRA, say, last year?
Last year, it's about 2 million, and this year, as of now, 3 million.
Sorry, fraud in all its forms?
In identity, dans les vols d'identité.
In identity theft.
For all types of fraud, GST carousel schemes. You said zero tolerance for fraud in all its forms. I'm asking for a number on how much fraud has been perpetrated against the Canadian taxpayer.
Quand on dit qu'on a zéro tolérance,
When we say we have zero tolerance, it means we have a strong team and systems and tools.
Is that the testimony? You don't have a number?
à chaque fois qu'il y en a une, on
Well, every single time there is a case, we hit back and we introduce all the measures so that those situations don't keep happening. That's what I mean when I say we have zero tolerance.
With respect to the identity fraud, just one more question on this matter. Since it was a significant number of instances, a sophisticated operation, no doubt, did you report this to the RCMP? Have they been engaged to, potentially consider links to organized crime, maybe an inside individual within the CRA that would be potentially aiding and abetting these kinds of schemes? Have you engaged the RCMP on the identity fraud cases?
Donc le 31 000 cas dont on parle.
So the 31,000 cases that we keep referring to, there are multiple cases. There are groups of different situations in that. For instance, there is a denial of service attack, but there are also multiple individual attacks. So there are investigations that are going on, and we have an internal criminal investigations team that is also working on files. So there are different levels of investigations that are going on.
But your criminal investigations team is not the RCMP, so the question still remains, has any of these identity theft cases, especially those with respect to the third parties' breaches, have they been referred to the RCMP, or are you asking for help from the RCMP to help you?
Dans certains cas, certainement, parce que
In some cases, definitely, because as I was saying, in the last 5 years,
That's a yes, you have asked the RCMP for help?
certainement, parce qu'on a des condamnations.
sure, because charges have been laid. 135 charges have been laid in the last 5 years. So that means it comes from the police.
Breaches and the issue with the H&R Block, you have engaged the support of the RCMP?
Si vous voulez me référer à une...
Well, if you want to point me towards a specific...
In the next hour. These frauds often result in a debt owing to the government, a debt owing to the taxpayer. So with respect to the GST, very sophisticated GST carousel schemes, my question would be, what's the highest amount that the government has written off with respect to the GST carousel schemes?
Encore une fois,
Once again, if you want to, if you would like to point me towards a specific case, I will be able to answer. But what I can say about carousels is that we have many measures in place. I can talk about those.
Generally, what's the single largest amount to a corporate taxpayer that the CRA wrote off last year?
je ne peux pas vous parler d'un cas en particulier.
I can't talk about a specific case.
Because of Section 241? Is that correct? So would your position be that your predecessor and the CRA violated Section 41 when in 2019 they said that the highest amount of the amount that they wrote off in 2019 was $133 million? They actually were free to give the amount of the highest amount that a corporate taxpayer has written off. So, Minister, do you still want to rely on Section 241 privacy?
Regardez, je vais me tourner vers le commissaire.
I will turn to the committee.
Could it be 500 million, maybe 600 million? Like what's the amounts we're talking about here?
J'ai le processus sous les yeux, mais
Well, I have the procedure before me, but I cannot give you the amount. Would you like to respond to that?
Sorry, I want to be very clear about this. Section 241 does not allow you to hide behind giving anonymized details. A previous minister and a previous CRA department released a number that said in 2019, $133 million was written off to one taxpayer. So my question is,
Chambers.
how much was written off to the highest amount in last year?
So first, again, to repeat, I won't be able to answer that question
Okay.
because I don't know.
Okay.
But we are very public with our write-offs in the public account.
Okay.
And that's where some numbers, as much as we can reveal, is revealed there. So we can
Thank
go
you.
back and look at those, and maybe I can find the number that you're
Thank you,
looking
Mr.
for.
Hamilton.
And we
Thank you,
actually have some
Mr.
officials that
Chambers.
may be able-
Minister, are you currently investigating whistleblowers? within the CRA?
On n'est pas en train de faire une...
We're not investigating our employees. We're just reminding our employees what their obligations are. And that is as per Section 241.
In a CBC story, you wouldn't deny the fact that you were going through the use of computers to see who is accessing what files and for what. Are you currently investigating whistleblowers within the CRA?
Can I talk, when you talk about whistleblowers,
People who presented information to the public.
In the public domain, we will always investigate if somebody does something inappropriate relative to our code of ethics or their duty of loyalty to us. So, for example, when we found that there were a bunch of employees that had claimed CERB,
Sure.
that was inappropriate.
Are you currently investigating the whistleblowers that resulted in the story with the Fifth Estate?
We are currently looking at all sorts of things that go on in the agency.
I'm asking you for a direct answer, sir. Could you please provide the committee with a direct answer one more time? Are you investigating the whistleblowers that resulted in the story of the Fifth Estate?
We are looking to determine how, if information was true and how it got into the public domain.
Will there be retribution, and if so, what will it be for the whistleblowers who went
I have no idea at this stage.
You have
we
no
don't know.
policies for this, sir?
We do have policies, but
What are the
I think, as was indicated, it can go from minor discipline, a verbal reprimand, a written one, all the way up to termination. So it depends on the severity of what happened, and we have strict policies about that. So when something bad happens, to have maybe take the CERB case again, there were people that were fired.
We're talking with specificity of the Fifth Estate. So for the people who are watching, and particularly those who, for the public interest, shared information with the public, perhaps they felt that their loyalty was to the Canadian taxpayer to make sure they had the right information and not to a bureaucracy or a government per se. What do you say to those people who are watching here today?
I say we take very seriously our responsibility in that regard to be honest, truthful, and protect the Canadian public. But we also have to protect the information that's within the agency, because
Information or
my
embarrassment?
information, we can't allow
Information or embarrassment? Because it's not
information.
disaggregated information. It's not like they're talking about my receipts. They're talking about a huge breach that resulted in 31,000 cases of fraud. So that's not material privacy breaches of individual files. That is a systematic and structural failure within the agency to figure out what was going on with these third parties. They obviously felt like it wasn't being addressed, so they went public. So that, to me, as an MP, quite frankly, I feel like we had a duty to know as well.
Hey, Mr.
We
Ray.
also did not have the opportunity to know until we found out.
Okay, that's the 3 minutes.